I came back from that long weekend with the kind of exhaustion that makes you feel hollow behind the eyes. The bus ride had been cramped, the weather muddy and warm, and all I wanted was to drop my bag in my room, throw my clothes in the corner, and collapse for the sort of coma nap that only a college student can manage. I remember walking down my hallway with that quiet relief you get when you know exactly what your next 5 minutes will look like. My door used to mean rest. It used to mean my space, my rhythm, my things. Now it means something else entirely. When I turned my key, the lock didn't catch the way it normally did. The resistance was wrong, softer somehow, like someone had oiled it or replaced a part without telling me. I didn't think much of it. People overthink locks. They forget how inconsistent hardware can be. I pushed the door open with my shoulder, already rehearsing a complaint about the drafty window I kept meaning to fix. There was a guy in my bed, a guy I had never seen before. He was sitting upright with a laptop on his knees, wearing headphones, completely comfortable. And the insane part, the part that didn't hit me until a second later, was how normal he seemed. His clothes were folded on my desk chair. His toiletries were lined up on my dresser. His backpack leaned casually against my closet. Everything about him said he belonged here and I didn't. People think the worst part was seeing a stranger using my things. It wasn't. The worst part was that absolutely nothing of mine was left. My posters were gone. My sheets were replaced. The laundry bag I always hung on the bedpost was missing. Even the stupid chipped mug I left by the window, gone. Every trace of my existence had been removed so cleanly, it looked like I had never lived there at all. I took a breath and said the most polite version of panic I could manage. This is my room." The guy paused his music, looked at me for a long moment, then gave this soft, confused half smile, like I was the one making a weird assumption. "No, man," he said. "This is room 418. They just moved me in Friday." "That's my room. I've been in 418 all semester." He shook his head, not dismissively, genuinely puzzled, like he was trying to piece together someone else's dream. "Housing told me this unit was empty. They said whoever was in here moved out last week." I laughed at the absurdity, the way you laugh when your brain refuses to accept a new reality. I stepped past him, opening my closet, then checking the underbed drawers. Empty, cleaned, cleared. No dust outlines, no impressions, not even the stupid lime green sticky note I'd kept on the inside wall with a grocery list from September. It was like I had vanished cleanly, professionally, and without complaint. I remember telling myself it was just a clerical error. Housing screws up all the time. Maybe they swapped room numbers on accident. Maybe someone processed something incorrectly while half asleep. Offices are held together by tired people, doing their best. Mistakes happen. And that rationalization carried me exactly as far as the RA's door. She stared at me like she was waiting for a punchline. "You said you had a room switch approved?" she asked slowly. "No," I said. "Someone switched me out without telling me." She scrolled through her tablet, frowning. "There's no record of you ever being assigned to 418. I felt something cold and bright crack open in my chest. "I live there. My stuff was there." She tapped again. "Your file says you were offered temporary housing after you filed a maintenance complaint. It says you're in 2C for the next 2 weeks. I hadn't filed anything, and 2C wasn't even on my floor. I asked to see the paperwork. She turned the screen toward me, and there it was, my name, my student ID number, my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. It was a version of my handwriting, but stiffer, straighter, like someone had practiced it. My scalp prickled. "That's not mine." She looked at me with the sympathetic dread of someone who realizes she is now part of something she doesn't want to be involved in. "You'll have to take this up with housing tomorrow. For tonight, I can let you into 2C. 2C used to be a storage room. They'd converted it into a temporary unit concept that everyone called the shoebox. The bed was narrower, the walls unpainted behind the cheap posters they'd hung to hide stains. The air smelled like dust and something faintly sour. I sat on the edge of the mattress, feeling the springs bite through, and waited for the adrenaline to settle. It didn't. Not that night, not the next. By the end of the week, I had visited housing 5 separate times. They showed me signatures, emails I supposedly sent, a request form for the room switch with a timestamp from a day I had been 2 states away. The director even pulled the digital logs from the key system. It showed my ID card unlocking 418 at 4:17 a.m., the night before I left for my trip. I was asleep miles off campus at that time. They said the system doesn't make mistakes, people do, but I hadn't, and the only other possibility, the one no one wanted to say out loud, was that someone had intentionally removed me, not just moved my things, scrubbed me out. The guy in my old room stayed friendly, too friendly sometimes. He'd smile when I passed him in the hallway. Once he told me, "It's weird, you know. Feels like I've been here longer than I have." And I remember thinking that he was right. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew the quirks of the place, knew the light switch that flickered for half a second, knew which desk drawer sticks if you don't pull it from the right side, knew about the faint rattle in the heater when the vents kick on. He knew things he shouldn't have known yet. When I asked where my stuff went, housing shrugged. "Your checkout form says you collected everything." They had a copy of that form too, initialed, signed, perfect handwriting. After 2 weeks in 2C, they reassigned me to a different building altogether. New room, new ID key, new beginning. That's what they told me. And I would have believed it maybe, if not for the day I walked past 418 again. The door was open a crack. No one inside. The guy was gone. Moved out early, apparently. But on the inside of the closet door, barely visible unless you stood at the right angle, there was a single faint mark. A rectangle, clean, dust-free. The exact outline of the lime green sticky note I had kept there. My things had been removed, my presents erased, my paperwork replaced, but that one shadow remained. I stood there long enough for someone to walk past and give me the look people give someone, reminiscing about a place they never actually lived. I don't know who decided to replace me. I don't know why someone needed my room enough to forge a trail of paperwork convincing enough to overwrite my existence in the system. What I do know is this: when institutions make mistakes, they correct them. When people make mistakes, they apologize. But when an entire campus quietly accepts a new reality in which you were never there, never lived where you lived, never owned the things you owned, that's not a mistake. That's a decision. I used to love the 24/7 study room in the old library basement. It wasn't cozy or warm or aesthetically pleasing in any way, but it had this strange neutrality that made it perfect for late night work. No windows, no clocks, no movement except the humming fluorescent lights that always flickered like they were remembering something. You go down there, swipe in, pick a cubicle, and disappear for a while. That was the point, disappearing. But after that night, the room stopped meaning concentration and started meaning something else entirely. Something I still don't have a name for. I swiped in at 2:03 a.m., the plastic of my ID card warm from being in my pocket too long. I remember because I checked the time on my phone before going in, debating whether coffee would push me past the point of usefulness. The study room was empty, which wasn't strange for that hour. The silence felt thick enough that even the scrape of my shoe on the carpet sounded wrong. I chose a cubicle in the back corner, the one under the vent where it was always a little colder, and unpacked my notes. The plan was simple. Study until I felt tired enough to sleep without waking up 3 hours later in a panic. Anyone who's lived on a campus knows that cycle. It didn't work out that way. The studying itself felt normal. More normal than it had any right to feel. Time in that room usually stretches and folds in on itself. The lighting does something to your sense of duration. But even then, I could tell something was off. Every time I checked the clock on my laptop, I blinked twice because the minutes didn't match the pacing of my thoughts. It was like reading a book you know you've read before, except the pages you remember aren't where they should be. Still, I made it through 2 chapters, a full practice quiz, and half a set of notes before my eyes started to burn. When I finally packed up, it felt like hours had passed. It felt right in my muscles, the stiffness of my shoulders, the dryness in my mouth. But when I stepped out into the hallway and pulled out my phone, the screen said 2:06 a.m. 3 minutes had passed. People think the worst part was the time jump. It wasn't. The worst part was how exhausted I felt, like my body remembered something my mind didn't. I know what you're thinking. Malfunctioning phone, dead battery. I thought that too. I rubbed my eyes, unlocked the screen again, and checked a wall clock upstairs. Same time, exact same. I walked outside just to see if the sky had changed. Same night, same air, same everything. The next morning, I convinced myself it was a fluke. Maybe the exhaustion made me misread the time going in. Maybe I hallucinated part of the study session. The mind does weird things at 2 a.m., and I'd been running on caffeine and sheer stubbornness for days. Then security emailed me. The message was brief, polite, and unsettling in that overly formal way campus emails get when they're trying very hard not to sound defensive. It said, "We noticed an anomaly in last night's study room logs associated with your ID. Please visit the security office at your earliest convenience." I went that afternoon. The guy behind the desk was young, student worker probably, but he looked like he'd been told to stay in his chair and not ask questions. He clicked through a series of screens, then turned the monitor slightly toward me. "There's your swipe in," he said. The timestamp read 2:03:14, and here's your swipe out, 02:06:27. "That's impossible," I said quietly. "I was in there for hours." He cleared his throat. "The door logs are accurate." "Then the time is wrong." He shook his head. "They're synced to network time. They update automatically every 60 seconds. I felt something deep in my spine go cold. "So, what are you saying?" He leaned back, eyes shifting toward a camera in the corner of the room. I could tell he wasn't supposed to speculate. But people on payroll still have instincts. They still have empathy. He lowered his voice. "The footage is weird." My stomach dropped. "Weird how?" He clicked again, and the grainy black and white security video loaded. I watched myself swipe in. I watched myself pull the door open. Then the angle changed to the camera inside the study room. The door opened again, and I stepped in. Then I walked straight out, 3 minutes later, without ever sitting down. The version of me in that footage didn't even look around the room, didn't hesitate, didn't forget anything or double back or move with the vague purpose of someone intending to study. They merely entered, paused for a second, then turned and left, like they'd realized something urgent elsewhere. That's not right," I whispered. The student worker kept his voice low. "We thought maybe you accidentally swiped in, forgot something, left, and then came back later without swiping." That would have made sense. Except I remembered studying. The cold vent air, the flicker of the lights, the growing ache behind my eyes, the full progress bar on my practice quiz. I remembered hours, not minutes. And here's the part I don't like telling. Here's the part people think sounds dramatic. When I looked at the version of me on the screen, the posture was right, and the walk was right, and the appearance was right. But the stillness wasn't. I don't mean physically. My body moved. I mean something else. Something internal. There was no hesitation in that person, no indecision, no micro-expressions of thought. They moved like someone following a script written just outside their field of awareness. I don't believe in doubles or ghosts or any of that, but I know what it looks like when someone isn't fully present in themselves. The student worker asked me if I wanted to file an incident report. I said no. What would I write? I studied for hours, but the cameras say I didn't. That's how you get flagged as unstable at a place where housing priority already feels like a lottery. Instead, I tried to recreate the experience a week later. I went back at 2 a.m., swiped in, sat in the same cubicle, and nothing happened. Normal study session, normal time, normal exhaustion, until I got the second email. Another anomaly, another 3-minute swipe out. The footage that time showed me entering with a coffee cup, stepping inside, glancing over my shoulder, then leaving again. No studying, no sitting, no hours. But I remembered the hours. My body remembered them even more. The stiff neck, the sore wrists, the cracked knuckles. My laptop battery percentage matched a long session. The systems just didn't. At some point, I stopped trying to prove anything. I stopped using the study room altogether. People don't realize how much of campus life relies on quietly accepting the first convenient explanation. Stress, fatigue, faulty memory. Everyone's stretched thin, so everyone forgives the cracks. But sometimes, when I pass the basement door on my way to the library elevators, I get this sensation. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Like my brain is matching something that isn't in my conscious memory. A strange vertigo in the gut. A pulse of familiarity without context. I don't know what the camera saw. I don't know what version of me walked out after 3 minutes. But I know what I felt in that room. I know what I lived through. And I know the difference between a lost hour and an occupied one. Time doesn't just vanish. It goes somewhere. Someone accounts for it. And the part that keeps me up even now is this. I checked the footage frame by frame the second time. My reflection in the glass door looked normal. The moment before I stepped out, just one frame, the reflection smiled. I didn't. My roommate's alarm used to be one of those soft, chiming tones that sounded peaceful the first morning and intolerable by the end of the second week. It always went off at 7:10 a.m., sharp, every single day, even weekends. The guy had discipline, or maybe just anxiety. Either way, I got used to waking up to that faint melodic beeping through the thin divider curtain we'd hung between our beds for privacy. But the week everything changed. The alarm took on a different quality. It stopped being a nuisance and started being a message. The first morning, I didn't think anything of it. His alarm went off at 7:10, chimed for a minute, then stopped. But he didn't shuffle around afterward like he normally did. No morning cough, no rustling for clean clothes, no thud of his water bottle hitting the desk. I figured he was being quiet, maybe trying not to wake me. The second morning, the same thing happened. Alarm, beeping, silence. That was strange, because he had an 8 a.m. chemistry lab he never skipped. The kind of class where missing even one session meant hours of makeup work. I told myself he probably crashed at his girlfriend's dorm. People do that. No big deal. But by the third morning, the alarm had a pattern. 7:10 a.m., 60 seconds of chimes. Silence. Except this time, the silence felt wrong. Too complete, too staged, like the room was holding its breath. People think the worst part was not seeing him. It wasn't. The worst part was realizing how quickly I'd accepted the absence of someone I lived beside every day. I finally peeked behind the curtain that afternoon. His bed was made. Perfectly. The way he only did before going home for break. His shoes were lined up neatly underneath, all pairs accounted for. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing looked lived in, and that in itself was unsettling. He wasn't tidy. He was functional. His side of the room always had signs of recent activity. A hoodie draped over the chair, notes spread out haphazardly, a mug on the windowsill with the last inch of coffee turning cold. But all of it was cleared. I checked his closet. His clothes were still there. I checked his desk. His laptop was gone. I checked the bathroom caddy. His toothbrush was dry. Brittle bristled like it hadn't been used in days, and I had to ask myself the question I'd been avoiding for 48 hours. When was the last time I actually saw him? Not heard the alarm, Not heard him come in late or take a shower or type furiously at 1 a.m. I mean, saw him consciously with awareness. It had been at least a week. I went to the RA. The expression she gave me was the kind reserved for people reporting extremely boring problems or extremely complicated ones. "When did you last see him?" she asked. I hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything. She checked the visitation logs. He hadn't swiped into the building in 9 days. "What about classes?" I asked. She shrugged. "Some people drop off the grid for a while." I wanted to ask what a while meant, but she was already turning her attention to another resident waiting behind me, clearly done with the conversation. Bureaucracy hates lingering. That night, I tried to ignore the growing dread. I did homework, I showered, I microwaved a frozen burrito. Normal things. Human things. But the alarm hung over my head. Literally. His phone sat on his desk, right next to his pens, plugged gently into the wall, like someone had placed it there with quiet intention. 7:10 a.m. The alarm went off. He didn't return. I silenced it myself, and that felt like crossing a line I didn't understand. By the 5th day, other residents were starting to notice. Not because they missed him. Nobody on our floor was particularly close to him, but because of the pattern. His classes emailed. His lab partner knocked on the door twice. His girlfriend texted me asking if he was still pissed. I didn't know what that meant. I finally messaged his parents using the number listed in our roommate agreement. A woman picked up. Calm voice. Controlled. Too controlled. "I'm sorry," she said after I introduced myself. "You must have the wrong number." "But this is the number he wrote down for emergencies?" "I'm afraid you're mistaken." She hung up before I could ask anything else. I stared at the wall for several minutes afterward, the phone still in my hand, feeling the shape of her voice echoing in my head. Not stressed, not confused, more like prepared. That's when I made the mistake of checking his desk drawer, the one he kept locked with a tiny luggage padlock. The lock was hanging open. Inside were 3 items: a printed schedule with all his class times crossed out, a campus map with our dorm circled in red ink, and a small notebook with dates written down the margin, scores of them, weeks worth. Every date had a check mark, until 8 days ago. After that, nothing. I flipped through the pages. Each day had brief notes. Library 3 hours. Study group canceled. Dinner alone. All good. And then the last entry. Alarm stays on. Important. That felt like a punch. Why would he need to remind himself of that? Why would the alarm, his alarm, be the one thing he cared about enough to mark as important on the final day he documented his life? I looked around at his perfectly made bed, his lined-up shoes, his dry toothbrush, his life frozen in place exactly the moment he decided to step out of it. The next morning, 7:10 a.m., the alarm went off again, and something inside me broke a little. The sound felt less like a wake-up call and more like a heartbeat, one that didn't belong to me. I finally went to campus security. They checked the door logs. No entries, no exits, no flags on his ID. They asked if he had mental health issues. I said no. They asked if he used substances. I said no. They asked if he had enemies. That one made me laugh, bitterly. He barely talked, I said. He barely existed outside of routines. And then the officer gave me a look, sharp, assessing, and asked a question I still can't forget. "Are you sure he was here as much as you think he was?" I wanted to be angry, but the truth hit harder than the insult. I wasn't sure. Most days we passed each other like ghosts in a hallway, both half asleep, half present. Maybe he'd been gone longer than I realized. Maybe I'd been filling in the gaps with assumptions out of habit. Routine can mimic presence. Predictability can mimic existence. A week later, the university reassigned me to another room, for your comfort and safety. They didn't explain further. They didn't look for him again in any official capacity, not beyond the initial forms. Campus has a way of quietly closing chapters it can't solve. But on the last night before I moved, I woke up at 7:10 a.m. Not because the alarm had gone off, because it hadn't. The room felt dead, wrong, unbalanced. I checked his desk. His phone was gone. The outlet was empty. Someone, something, had removed the last proof he had ever been there at all. That should have been the end of it. But last month, walking past my old building on the way to a meeting, I heard something through one of the open windows on the 4th floor. A faint, chiming tone. Soft, melodic. 7:10 a.m. Maybe a coincidence. Maybe someone else uses the same alarm tone. But I felt it, deep in that part of the mind that recognizes patterns before it understands them. He never left that routine. He just took it somewhere else. The first time I noticed something out of place in my dorm room, it was so small I talked myself out of caring. My notebook, always on the left side of my desk, was on the right, just slightly angled too, as if someone had set it down while distracted. Easy mistake. I'd been rushing that morning, half late for class, brain foggy with deadlines. I told myself I'd moved it without remembering. The second day, it was my laundry bag, shifted 6 inches toward the door. The third day, a pen was missing. Not stolen, just moved. From my desk to the foot of my bed, a place I never put anything except dirty socks and stray receipts. That pen looked almost theatrical sitting there, like someone was arranging clues in a room meant to stay unnoticed. People think the worst part is believing someone entered your space. It isn't. The worst part is realizing how easily you doubt your own memory when the alternative feels too invasive to accept. By the 4th day, the pattern was undeniable. Every time I came back from class, something had shifted. Small things, mundane things, things that had no logical reason to be touched by anyone but me. My hairbrush turned bristles up, even though I always left it bristles down. My whiteboard marker swapped colors. My desk chair angled slightly toward the door instead of the window. Nothing stolen, nothing broken, just observed, touched, adjusted, as if someone wanted to remind me they'd been close without ever crossing the line into obvious threat. My first thought was maintenance. They had entered unannounced once before to check the window latch, and the intrusion had bothered me more than I admitted. I figured maybe they were doing quarterly inspections or something and didn't leave notice. It happens. Buildings are old, staff is understaffed, mistakes slip. But the 5th day made the mistake theory impossible. My pillow was warm, not sun warm, not body heat from this morning warm, fresh warm, recent warm. Someone had been sitting on my bed not long before I returned. My body reacted before my mind did. My breath stuttered. My vision pinched at the edges. I stood completely still, keys still in my hand, listening to my own pulse battering my ears. I left the room immediately, pretending I'd forgotten something in my backpack so anyone inside wouldn't know I suspected. I stood in the hallway pretending to rummage through my bag, forcing myself to count to 60. No movement, no footsteps, nothing. But the warmth stayed with me. A signature of presence. I reported it to housing the next morning, feeling stupid and paranoid, rehearsing the least embarrassing way to explain someone's been moving my stuff. They nodded politely, clicked around on their computer, and promised to check the security logs. 2 hours later, they emailed me. There is no indication of unauthorized access to your room. No maintenance requests or key usage beyond your own ID. There it was. The line universities use when they want you to drop something. No indication. It doesn't mean nothing happened. It means nothing was recorded. Still, I wasn't satisfied. I asked to see the maintenance logs myself. I figured maybe there'd been a mix-up or someone fat-fingered a room number. The student worker hesitated, then let me look at the weekly spreadsheet. And that's when my stomach bottomed out. There was an entry listed under my name for a duplicate key request. submitted 3 days earlier, approved, fulfilled, picked up, the signature next to received by resident was mine, except it wasn't. It looked like my handwriting in the vaguest sense, same slant, similar proportions, but anyone who actually writes their name daily knows the difference between a real signature and someone's practice attempt. My throat went dry. I didn't request this. The student worker leaned in. Well, someone did. I asked who approved it. He gave me a name I didn't recognize. I asked to speak to that person. He said she wasn't on shift and didn't know when she'd be back. That was the first crack in the institutional facade. Hesitation. Real hesitation. I asked who picked it up. He tapped the signature field again. According to this, you did. That sentence has a way of sticking in the craw. According to this, as if documentation is always right and memory is always suspect. I demanded to see the security footage from the front desk. He said I'd need an appointment. I made one. The earliest slot was 2 days later. Those 2 days were hell. I barely slept. I pushed my dresser in front of the door each night, even though I knew it wouldn't stop someone with a key. I set up tiny traps, pennies balanced on the top of the door, a sticky note under the knob, a strand of floss taped lightly across my desk drawer. All of them stayed in place. No shifts, no signs of entry. Nothing changed in those 2 days except my own stability. Then came the meeting. They pulled up the footage. I expected a blurry figure, maybe someone in a hoodie, maybe someone rushing or leaning out of frame. Instead, the video showed someone confidently approaching the desk in broad daylight. Someone who walked at my pace. Someone with my build. Someone wearing a backpack eerily similar to mine. But it wasn't me. The face wasn't fully visible, camera angle too high, but the posture was familiar enough to make me nauseous. They slid a piece of paper across the desk. They chatted calmly with the receptionist. They showed their ID. The timestamp matched the key request. The ID scanner beeped. My name appeared on the screen. I gripped the edge of the desk. That's not me. The security officer narrowed his eyes. Do you ever lend your ID to anyone? No, never. Lose it? Even briefly? No. Have a twin? I stared at him. He smirked like it was a joke, but the joke didn't land. They rewound the footage. Played it again, zoomed, enhanced. Nothing made it clearer. Nothing made it make sense. When the officer finally spoke, he didn't sound reassured. He sounded bored, dismissive. Sometimes students don't like to admit they misplaced their cards. It's fine. It happens. I wanted to grab him by the shirt. I wanted to scream. Instead, I closed my eyes and breathed because I knew reacting emotionally would only make me seem unstable. Can you deactivate the duplicate key? I asked quietly. He glanced at the computer. Both keys are active. We can't deactivate yours without proof of loss. But the duplicate, he shook his head. Same problem. No proof. That was the moment I understood something I'd been resisting for days. I was not going to win this through official channels. Someone had inserted themselves into my life with precision, with preparation, with access to my identity, and the system had already chosen a version of the story that made their workload easier. By the next week, the intrusions escalated. I came home to find my window cracked open, just an inch, just enough to suggest someone had touched it. My lamp was unplugged. My closet door was left slightly ajar. And then the worst one. My pillow smelled like unfamiliar shampoo. Not threatening, not disgusting, just someone else. The night I decided to move out, I found the duplicate key on my desk, placed neatly, dead center, balancing perfectly on top of a post-it note with 3 words written in handwriting almost indistinguishable from mine. You keep this. I packed a duffel bag and left before sunrise. I didn't wait for paperwork. I didn't ask permission. I walked straight to a friend's apartment and slept on her couch for 3 weeks. Campus eventually reassigned me to a different building, due to ongoing maintenance concerns. They never admitted anything. They never found the mistake. But every now and then, when I'm unlocking my new door, I get this prickling sensation along the back of my neck. Not fear exactly, not memory either. Something in between. Something that refuses to fade. Because someone out there still has a key that matches mine. Someone who practiced my signature. Someone who walked like me. Someone who wanted to be close enough to touch my things, but not close enough to be seen. And the thing that keeps me up sometimes is this. They didn't leave the key because they were done. They left it because they didn't need it anymore. I used to take the late night shuttle without thinking twice. It was part of the background machinery of campus life, like cafeteria hours or the library printers always being jammed. The shuttle looped the same route every night, predictable to the minute, and there was something comforting about that reliability. If you missed the 12:20 a.m. run, you waited 12 minutes and caught the next one. Simple, mechanical, safe. But the night the driver changed, the route stopped being a routine and became a warning. I remember standing at the stop behind the science building, the one with the flickering street lamp that made everyone look slightly blurred at the edges. It was nearly 1 a.m., freezing, and the wind smelled like metal and old leaves. When the shuttle pulled up, it wasn't the usual driver, the older woman with the neon scrunchie who always played soft pop. This driver was new, younger, clean-shaven, wearing the standard campus jacket but zipped to the throat, hood up. I hesitated for half a second, but it was late, I was tired, and nobody else was around. I climbed in. There were no other passengers. People think the worst part was the moment he took the wrong turn. It wasn't. The worst part was how normal everything seemed until then. The doors hissed shut behind me. I tapped my student ID on the reader, and the little green check mark flashed as usual. The driver didn't say hello, but not all of them did. I sat in the middle row, the seat I always picked. The shuttle smelled like vinyl and old floor cleaner. The windows were fogged at the edges. The heaters clicked, routine, familiar. The shuttle pulled away from the curb and rolled toward the main loop. I pulled out my phone, half distracted by homework I hadn't finished, half asleep. We passed the athletic fields, the student union, the empty fountain that never worked after October. Every turn was exactly where it should be, until it wasn't. The shuttle approached the roundabout where it should have swung left toward the north dorms. Instead, the driver continued straight. At first, I assumed he was going around again. Drivers did that sometimes when they were running ahead of schedule. But then he took a right turn onto a road I'd never seen on any campus map. I leaned forward slightly. This doesn't go to the dorms." He didn't respond. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me? I think you missed the loop." Still nothing. His posture didn't change. His hands stayed at 10 and 2, but something in his stillness made the hair on my arms rise. People who are ignoring you move differently than people who never intended to respond in the first place. I tried again, louder. "Hey, this isn't the route." This time he tilted his head just enough that I could see his jawline under the hood. Not acknowledgement, more like assessment. Then he faced forward again. The lights outside changed. Fewer lampposts, more trees. No buildings, no sidewalks. Just that narrow road sliding deeper into the undeveloped part of campus. A place I'd only seen on construction maps for future expansions that never actually happened. My heartbeat picked up. My palms got slick. I reminded myself not to panic at the first sign of weirdness. People take wrong turns, GPS glitches. Maybe he was new and mixed up the directions. Rational explanations always come first. That's what keeps your mind from spiraling into fear. "Are you a new driver?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He didn't answer. We crossed an intersection with no street signs. Then another. Then another. Something about the road felt off. Not dangerous, just wrong in an administrative sense. Like it wasn't meant to be publicly used. The asphalt was too smooth, too freshly laid. No cracks, no patches. Campus roads always have wear. This one looked brand new. I checked my phone. 0 service. Not weak service, 0. The kind of dead zone you only get between tall concrete buildings or underground. But we were neither. Can you please stop? My voice cracked a little. I think there's a mistake. Nothing. I stood up and grabbed the nearest handrail as the bus jostled over a subtle incline. Stop the shuttle. The driver exhaled once, a slow, almost thoughtful sound. Not annoyed, not startled, just present in a way that made my stomach twist. The shuttle didn't slow. I thought about the emergency exit in the back, about whether jumping from a moving vehicle would break a leg, about the way the trees outside looked like they were closing in. Then the shuttle finally stopped, not gently, not at a curb or sign, just there, in the middle of nowhere. The driver stayed still for a long moment, hands on the wheel, shoulders squared. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. My entire body locked in place, waiting for whatever came next. Then he did something I still replay in my head when I can't sleep. He leaned forward slowly until his forehead almost touched the steering wheel. Then he said, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, "You should stop taking the late shuttle." Not a threat, not advice, something in between. He straightened, shifted the bus into reverse, and backed onto the road with expert precision. Then he drove the rest of the route perfectly, dropping me off exactly where I needed to be, without another word. I got off shakily. My knees felt like they might give. The shuttle pulled away, disappearing down the street like nothing unusual had happened. The next morning, I went to transportation services. I asked about the new driver. The woman at the desk gave me a puzzled look. There was no new driver last night. There was, I insisted. Different guy, hood up, quiet, younger. She typed something into her computer. The only person driving the late route this week is Angela. That wasn't Angela. She printed the shift log. Only one driver, same name, same employee number, no substitutes, no changes. I asked about the road he took. She frowned harder. The shuttle doesn't go off the loop. It hasn't for years. I pressed. She insisted. Eventually, she pulled up the GPS data from the bus. The shuttle's dot stayed on the regular loop all night. No deviations, no unexplained dips in the route, nothing. I asked if the system ever malfunctioned. She said sure sometimes, but not the timestamped camera footage she showed me afterward. Footage that showed nobody in the shuttle except me. Footage that showed a driver wearing a neon scrunchie. Footage that showed the shuttle never leaving campus proper. I stared at the screen, my throat tight, my vision buzzing. "That's not what happened," I whispered. "That's not what happened." The woman gave me the sympathetic half nod of someone who has dealt with too many exhausted students. But she didn't say I was wrong. She didn't say I imagined it. She just said, "Don't take the late shuttle anymore. It's quieter when no one rides alone." That night, I walked back to my dorm. Since then, whenever I see the shuttle glide by, empty except for the driver, I get that same pulse of dread in the base of my spine. Because I know what it feels like when the routine collapses, when the system lies to itself to stay neat, when someone, human, fallible, unpredictable, decides to deviate from the role they're supposed to play. Sometimes I catch myself wondering, did he mean I shouldn't ride the shuttle because he wouldn't be the one driving next time? Or because he would?
Thanks for spending Thanksgiving here with me, in the quiet spaces where gratitude and dread blur together. These stories weren't about ghosts or legends. They were about the way ordinary people crack under pressure, how family secrets rip open at the worst possible moment, and how a holiday built on togetherness can turn into a stage for the truths no one wants spoken. This time of year, houses glow warm from the outside, but inside there are screen doors that open without a sound, poisoned plates passed across tables, strangers carrying your last name, and confessions that undo decades of silence. As you move into the season, listen closely. to knocks, to footsteps, to the pauses between words at the table. And stay wary, because Thanksgiving isn't done with you yet.